Welcome back to OT Unleashed Student Takeover. I'm Katie Peterson, and today we're continuing our series looking at adaptive controllers. We'll kind of touch on the history of adaptive controllers, what's new and exciting out there, and kind of go over some of those big ones that we all have found and have been working for us. Today, I'm very excited to continue our conversation with Erik, who has done amazing work with adaptive controllers and accessibility, including some collaboration with Microsoft, which has helped shape how adaptive controllers are designed and used today. So, Erik, I'm so excited to have you back and to be talking about this again.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited. And this is actually one of my favorite parts of the story because I do think that it really kicked off a new era of accessibility, with gaming in general. The controller itself is everything when it comes to being able to play a game, right? I mean, like, you can't really, like, video games are just not video games without being able to control a video game. And whether that's using your eyes or like your body or whatever to play, a controller is kind of a must, right? And so I think that if we kind of think about, an interface between the human and the system, whether that be Xbox, PlayStation, PC, or even a phone, accessibility can definitely be manipulated to enhance somebody's ability to play, or, honestly, there's a lot of barriers, so like as controllers have, made this kind of evolution into what it is today, we've seen a lot of kind of different ones come and go, and actually more of them come and stay than come and go, but there's been a lot of different changes and a lot of different takes on stuff like that. So, so it's a really cool journey, and I'm excited to dive into it with you guys.
Yeah, and it's taken a long time for this to get going from, the when gaming became super popular in the 70s and 80s, and controllers were just designed with a specific user who could use both hands, maintain the grip on the controller, and press those steady buttons. And before adaptive controllers were widely available, it limited the ability for many people to play the games. And
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to talk about, like, what do we think that gaming access looked like for people with physical disabilities back then prior to this, and how
Yeah.
did they participate in an occupation such as gaming?
It's interesting because if you look back on gaming, like when it started, a lot of you guys would recognize this guy right here. This is the Atari OG kind of, joystick, right? You have one button, and it's what we call a D-pad, right? It's up, down, left, and right, right? So it's very simple controls, but still, you would have to hold it with two hands to be able to play. Now, I was actually at the Video Game Museum, like the National Video Game Museum in Dallas, Texas, and at that museum, they actually had a really cool accessible device that I don't know at the time they realized what it was, but what it did was it was like a pyramid base that you could set the controller into and literally just use it with one hand. While, like, if I tried to use this with one hand, it would kind of move around and stuff like that, right? But this one, it was an actual Atari, licensed piece of plastic, and it would just drop down into the plastic, and it would hold on to it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that is literally an accessibility feature, and I'm so jazzed about it, So and I came by that. I didn't know it existed until I saw it, but I was like, oh, that could be one of the very first kind of accessibility, universal design type things that we've seen. So that was, that first thing. And if you actually, and then if you fast forward, and we're getting a little bit into the history of these controllers, but if you fast forward, a lot of you guys would recognize this one, which is the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES controller, right? And it's basic, right? It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different inputs on it. It's got your A and B, it's your start and select, and then the D-pad, similar to the joystick that we use with the Atari, except for instead of having a joystick that moves, the D-pad is just operated with the thumb, right? Once again, you still did need two hands to hold this and to be able to play. Now, Nintendo actually came out with two things that I think really changed the game in regards to accessibility for the controller itself for this. But one, they actually came out with a device, for people that maybe had spinal cord injury or something like that, that you could hang over your head. And we'll have the picture up here on the screen for you so you can kind of see this. But you can put it over your head, and it has a chin stick, so you could like move around, and then it has a sip and puff control. So you have now your ABX or your up, down, left, right with your chin, and then you have a sip and puff, which would be your A and B buttons. So then you could play Nintendo with this adaptive device. Now, it wasn't mass produced, but it was officially from Nintendo, and really cool that they would think about this in the 80s as kind of a part of the, accessibility and wanting, kids to be able to play even though they might not have those opportunities. So now Nintendo also came out with another thing that was really cool. And this is, it's the NES Advantage. And this one is kind of more of a flat tabletop type of controller, and it looks like an arcade style, and it is, because it has obviously a little ball there and a lot bigger control, joystick that you can manipulate, but also bigger buttons and whatnot. But also on top of that, so like this would be great because you could leave it flat and you could potentially use it with one hand and a thumb. Like this would be something that you could manipulate with one hand on a tabletop. But the cool thing about this too is that it's got some other features that make a game a little bit more accessible. And one is that they have a turbo buttons. And the turbo buttons make it so that if you hold down something, it will constantly push that button over and over again. So if I were it to be in, let's say I was in a game in space where I had to, shoot the aliens or something, I could hold down the button and it would constantly shoot instead of having to tap over and over and over, right? Because sometimes accessibility doesn't necessarily look like, oh, I can't reach the buttons. It's like, I can't tap that button fast enough.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a jump, or maybe it's something that, I have to use repetitively. So, that if you click the turbo buttons up here, then they will always hold and engage. The other thing that it has, so you can make it constantly push, but you can also put it on a slow-mo speed. So there's a button down here that says slow. And so let's say you have a game and maybe somebody with a cognition deficit that just can't, play the game because it's just too much is going on too fast. And so you can click that slow-mo where it basically slows the game down, so it's like, and what it actually is doing is, back in the day, if you push the start button, it would just pause the game.
Yeah.
And so what the slow motion button does is just pauses the game over and over again. It's like pause, 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 pause. But it's like pause on pause, pause on pause, pause on pause, but very quickly. So you're like, so it might give somebody an opportunity to like get through a level without the, the speed of what it's trying to require. So that's like kind of the early stages, of accessibility. If you think about controllers and kind of what they were doing, that was kind of that big kind of first push for adaptive controllers.
I think that's so awesome that they were even implementing some of these accessibility features back in the day.
Yeah.
I think the difficult part about it, like you said too, was that a lot of people just didn't know that these were out there already. Like, it's that advocacy that we're trying to do and push, us knowing about these features and how we could use them for therapy, or just, to help our clients be able to participate in gaming. But just those like little features that, were implemented back in the day, they were really thinking about the whole person. And I think that is just amazing, and we have come such a far way since then. And even as like OTs, we were already like, doing some of those maybe like DIY things, modifying the equipment. But now these software developers and engineers are really trying to implement these things so we don't have to do them ourselves, and to help everybody be able to participate and use these gaming systems the way that they intend to.
Yeah.
And we don't have to know all the technical knowledge now. We're
Yeah.
putting that onto someone
Yeah.
else, which
Well,
I think is
and I
great.
think you hit on a really good point. We talk about universal design. In my doctorate work, I really studied universal design quite a bit, and universal design is not necessarily accessible design. Matter of fact, I personally believe it's better than accessible design because universal design basically takes these humans, all humanity, and creates for the benefit of everybody, right? And universal design isn't, it's constantly moving, so you're constantly looking at how can I make things easier, more accessible, in general for people. So if you think about like one of the examples that people talk about all the time is like curb cuts, right? So like the ramps that go up onto sidewalks. Well, curb cuts were, they were made for wheelchair users, but guess what? How many people like roll up on their bikes or use the curb cuts for like a suitcase or just anything, right? It's universally designed to impact everybody. Or if you think about the doorknob versus a handle knob, the handle is universally designed for anybody. So if you don't have a hand and you want to open a door and you come up with a knob, how do you open that doorknob? But if you have a handle, I can open the handle. So, in the gaming industry, it's the same thing. Like we want to create universally for people, but also pull down those accessibility barriers, that prevent somebody to be able to play.
Right. And I really want to talk to you specifically about this stuff and get your insight on accessibility and how it has progressed because you have done some pretty great work with Microsoft yourself, right? Can
Yeah.
you maybe talk a little bit about your work and what has
Yeah.
developed from that?
It's crazy. So I come back from Afghanistan in 2010. Actually, 2011. I was there all 2010. Come back in 2011, and I take over as the chief of the amputee center at Walter Reed, which is a big, massive, the pinnacle of military medicine. And I take over the job that's kind of like the pinnacle of OT jobs of the military, which is chief of the amputees section of OT at the pinnacle of hospitals, right? So it was such a cool job. So it was all these people that were wounded and amputees coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who had lost limbs. And I will say, like we had these conversations where, you would, do an occupational profile and like, what are some of the things that you want to be able to do? And they would constantly, they would always say like, I want to be able to play video games, with my friends. I want to be able to play video games. Video games is a huge part. And so, so I started to work on adaptive gaming really at that moment where I was like, let's see how I can help people play video games. And so I started looking at what was available out there with an OT focused lens, looking at what controllers exist that maybe would work for some of my clients, some of the people that I'm working with. And so I would do a lot of work in the splinting world. I would do positioning, where like if you had a complex polytrauma and maybe your hand was mangled or something, that I could put a splint on it and clip a controller in there,
Yeah.
and then you could do one-handed gaming with your other complex polytrauma hand holding the thing.
Yeah.
I would do that, so I use splinting. And then another thing that I would do is like, again, look for different types of controllers. Like the Nintendo Wii is a great example of, you can play most of their games with just the one controller in motion, so we did a lot of that, right? So at one point in time, an engineer came in, saw what I was doing, and was like, hey, what are you doing over there? And I was like, man, I'm trying to get some, people to be able to play. And then from that, we developed the Warfighter Engage, which he basically would take these controllers and he would just literally like things like this is a controller. He would rip off the back of it like that, take it apart, and then he would kind of pull things together and wire things up, and we would make our own adaptive controllers off of what was already existed, soldering different buttons out to things like, so instead of having these small ABXYs, you'd have these large ABXYs, and so you could use gross motor movements to be able to play instead of these fine motor things. Well, during that process, while we were doing this work with Warfighter Engaged, we got a call from Xbox, from a gentleman who's like, hey, I've been watching you guys' work. We love what you're doing. Would you consider coming out and talking to Xbox about accessibility and whatnot? And so the engineer, Ken Jones, who is such a dear friend of mine, he and I went out there and he did this hackathon with Xbox where they created basically this concept of an adaptive controller that instead of having to break apart a controller, you could just kind of plug and play. And it made it so that it was a lot more it was a lot easier for somebody to be able to do this, and they could do a lot of the work on their own instead of us having to do it for them.
Yeah.
And really, that was the start of that journey, So that was the first time in the history of these hackathons that Xbox would take a piece of hardware and actually put it into production. And that was the start of it. And it was really cool because Xbox asked us to be a part of that process. And they said, hey, we're going to build this product. We want you to be a part of the team. And so for the next 3 years, we, consulted, we gave our opinions, we, talked about kind of, what might be a better way to attack the, problem for what this controller would look like. And then of course the controller eventually became the Xbox Adaptive Controller that was, released, I think 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of kind of that big push for accessibility in gaming.
That is just so cool. That story is just awesome, giving your
Yeah.
OT's perspective and using those components of universal design to make this controller.
Yeah.
What would you say makes this controller different than anything that was
Yeah.
already out there?
Yeah, well, let's talk about it a little bit, right? So this is your Xbox Adaptive Controller, and if you're listening to this, I'm holding the controller in my hand, so maybe take a quick look when you have a chance. But it's a large rectangle with 2 black buttons. It's got a D-pad similar to what we saw on the NES controller, but it's got very minimal inputs itself. But what makes it unique is what's on the outside of it. And so if you're watching this, you can see on the back side of the controller, I have 19 different 3.5 millimeter jack inputs. So if you're an OT or somebody that works in accessibility, that should be very familiar to you. So the 3.5 millimeter jack is that standard headphone jack, and most of our adaptive devices, equipment, toys that we play with, those are all 3.5 millimeters. So we wanted to keep it standard. So we have 19 buttons here, and all those 19 inputs basically replicate what you see on an Xbox controller. So if you take a typical Xbox controller, you have about 22 inputs. And so for this one particular, you have you take that ABXY, you take the D-pad, you take the sticks, you take the triggers, the bumpers, and you put them all in here. And so what happens is you can customize this to any client that you possibly want to. So if I want to say hey, I want to play a game that's soccer, and what I need to do is sprint, slide tackle, pass, and kick, I just maybe need 4 inputs and then a D-pad to move around or a joystick to move around. So I can take a set of switches or buttons like this, and you plug them in and you move around, and hey, these are the things that I need, and so that's all I have to do to be able to play, and I can plug them into the same controls that I would typically have in a controller, or if it's oh, I don't like that one, make the yellow one into this control, then you can just pull it out and put it in the other one. There's no programming, it just works, which is beautiful. It's simple, it's quick, and it makes a lot of sense. And I will say the one thing too about the controller is that if I want to play soccer, it's going to be different than if I want to play Mario Brothers, or if I want to play Sonic, or play a game like Mega Man where you have to do different things. So the Xbox has an option where you can program the controller to have 3 different profiles. So maybe Profile 1 is my soccer profile, Profile 2 is Fortnite or Call of Duty, and Profile 3 is Sonic or Mega Man or something, so
Yeah.
you can, so it's oh man, I don't want to have to redo everything every single time. You can do this. And actually on on Xbox itself, you can make additional profiles to be able to do that as well. So if you wanted more, you could actually do that as well. So that's kind of the basics of it. On the sides, you can see there's a couple USB inputs, and those are for joysticks. And so you can pull the joystick off and be able to play with that joystick. So yeah, that's that's kind of the nitty gritty, of the adaptive controller. That's kind of how we designed it. The big buttons on there, if you're wondering, the whole point of having the minimalist approach on the front was that we wanted you to be able to navigate the menu of the Xbox menu, so you can go up, down, left, right, and then you can select something and then go back if you need to. So that was the whole point of we need some buttons on there, but let's kind of keep it on that.
Yeah,
so.
I love the design of it because it's not overwhelming for users too.
Yeah.
And it's accessible. I know in another episode we're gonna get into the whole mounts and positioning and splinting and stuff like that, but you can mount it anywhere for, if they need to press it with their head or an elbow or something like that. And I think that design of it is perfect for if you needed to mount it up there too.
Yeah. That's a great point. And actually, on that, they do on the back have these 1/4-inch mounts, which is again a universal mount. So if you have a selfie stick or lights or something, that's the mount, right? Or if you have a tripod or anything, that's the mount, 1/4-inch mount. So this, and we will talk about mounts, you can mount anywhere. And like you said, I could mount it here and smack my face up against it if I want, or behind my head, or I could put it on the floor and use my feet. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into that.
That's awesome. And I love that you can customize it and that it gives the user a sense of autonomy too. Once you program it to whichever game you're playing, like you were saying, and you can always go back to it. You don't need someone to come and set it up every single time if you don't have the ability to do that. So you don't have to ask someone to help you be able to play the game and play something that you really want to do in that moment. You don't have to wait for your caregiver to come and set it up for you. It gives you that option to be able to do it right then and there, which I think is a great component and feature that you can do. And on Xbox's website, there is setup for it, correct? It walks you through all of that too, gives you a step-by-step guide how to do that as well.
Yeah. And I'll say Xbox, I really believe, and this is no plug for them, but I really believe they're leading the way on this journey of accessibility in video games. I mean, they are very intentional about it. I mean, matter of fact, with this controller, they, I don't know how much the Super Bowl commercial was back then, but they used their Super Bowl commercial to showcase the adaptive controller because they knew that they were going to sell 1 billion adaptive controllers. They were going to sell, maybe thousands instead of tens of thousands, and so to be able to be intentional and say, hey, we want to show that we're trying to be, inclusive and break down barriers for people with disabilities was huge for us, and for the record, I had a small part to play on the adaptive controller. I just, through a couple pieces of tidbits, watched it grow, did some beta testing on it. But there was a couple other OTs on it too. Erin Mustin-Fursh out of Craig Hospital. She was a big influence on the adaptive controller. Then we had a team over in England that also was instrumental with an OT on there as well. With Special Effect, that was the organization over there. So we had, a few OTs that worked on it, and so that's exciting. As a matter of fact, and I do want to get into this because I want to make sure that we hit on the potential, why advocacy is so important. But one of the things, as we were getting ready to launch the adaptive controller, Microsoft asked me to come out and be a part of the press day, the release. And at the time, there was a young woman who was that was a fieldwork student of mine who had been kind of coming up through the OT spaces that really wanted to integrate with me to be able to work with some gaming stuff. And this girl actually was the daughter of the engineer who saw my work at when she was a high schooler at Walter Reed and was like, I
Wow.
want to be an OT.
That's a
Not that
full
I
circle
completely influenced
moment.
that, but she then, did her internship with her fieldwork with me. And from there, Microsoft hired her directly to Xbox to be able to work on accessibility to have an OT on the team. And that is massive. And
Mhm.
she is now she is the accessibility lead for Xbox, which is insane
It's
that we have an OT literally working as the accessibility lead at Microsoft. And that's just a tale of advocacy, of showing that distinct value of our profession.
right.
And it's just incredible. It's incredible that we got there.
It really is. I mean, as OTs, we
Oh, that's
really,
Caitlin Jones, by the way.
yes.
I should drop her name. Dr. Caitlin Jones, such a dear friend of mine. I'm so proud of her. She has gone so far above and beyond what I'll ever do in the gaming world. And I'm just so excited to see her thrive and flourish and just be who she is.
And she was one of the people that influenced me to do this as well. And I read her
Yeah.
research and I talked to her, and the work that she has done and the influence that she's had on the gaming industry, it has the potential to just go off. And I am very excited to see what the future holds for gaming and Xbox. But I want to switch gears just a little bit
Yeah.
so we can
Yeah.
talk about some of the other options out there as
Yeah.
well,
Sorry. Yes.
besides
Yeah.
Xbox, because they were the people who started it. And after that, it was kind of like this domino effect
Yeah.
of, you know,
Yeah.
everybody wanting to be inclusive. So it's not just for one console, it's for other consoles. So one of the other
Yeah.
big ones is the PlayStation Access Controller as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the access control is really cool. It took a completely different approach, and I
Yeah.
will say again, not that I'm glowing on Xbox, but one of the cool things during our press tour was the president of Xbox. Phil Spencer, he was he was a part of the press tour, and one of the things that he had said during that is he said, I would be so happy to work with PlayStation to help them develop their own adaptive controller or to talk accessibility or whatever, which is like, I mean, if you think about gaming wars, like they all want
Yeah, the
their
competition
stuff.
between them is,
There's Yeah.
yeah.
So the fact that he was like, I don't care about competition when it comes to accessibility was big. So the access controller. So I'm gonna show it to you right now. So if you're seeing this, you'll see in this. But if you don't, it's kind of a round type of controller, and it's got white buttons all that circle it. They're all like pads, if you will.
Big difference in
And
design from
yeah,
Xbox.
yeah, huge difference. It also comes with its own native joystick, so you can, you make it a little bit longer, closer, but it has its own joystick on it, which is a big deal because, at the end of the day, joysticks are expensive, and so to have one native to the piece of equipment is a big deal. The other thing about it is you can also plug and play on all this as well. Like if all these are buttons, and so like if I have a position that I want to put a certain button in, I can take off the front of it like this. If you're not watching, I'm pulling off some of these pads on the outside that are buttons, and then I can replace them in different spaces. So if you're a lefty or righty, it doesn't matter. And I can also label them on each of these. They're like little buttons or tags that I can put on there, say this is the A button, this is the B button. Well, actually for Xbox is the square, triangle, X and O. So but they have all kinds of different buttons that you can put on there, and they also have different configurations that you can do. The nice thing too that I really like for the access controller is if I have somebody with a cognitive deficit and I'm really trying to get them to focus, this can get very confusing.
Right.
There's so many buttons here, which one do I push? So if I'm like, oh, I only want to have 2 buttons available to them, I can pull all the other buttons off and say, okay, all I want you to do is worry about these 2 buttons and the joystick, and then I kind of have them focus on kind of one space. And so that's
Yeah.
nice if I needed to grade the activity for them.
That's
That's kind of
exactly
cool.
where my mind was going. I mean, you can start off simple, with 2 buttons or the joystick or even one button, simplify the game, and then, through trial and error and more
Yeah.
familiarity with the controller, then you can add more and more
Yeah.
things, which I think is a really cool component as
Yeah.
well.
And I will say the magic of the PlayStation, the Access controller, is that you know it's magic, but also can be a little bit tricky. Is setting it up. Like the one thing with the Xbox Adaptive Controller is that you just plug and play. This
Right.
one is a little bit more tricky because you will most likely need to program where each of the buttons are, and that's within the PlayStation. Um, Systems setting, accessibility settings, which it's not that hard to do, but it is something you have to do if you
Right.
want to be able to play. And you can, like the adaptive controller, you can make your own profiles for different games and whatnot. So it's nice. The also other thing that's a little bit tricky on this is that it only has one joystick, and most games are going to require two joysticks. And
Yeah.
so you can buy a second adaptive joystick or a second one of these and use it like that. Or like the adaptive controller, and what I'm showing you on the screen is there are some more outputs for other buttons, external auxiliary buttons, and then you can also, there's a USB-C port here as well, and you can potentially use that for another joystick that comes off the Access controller. So pretty good controller. It has its flaws, just like the
Yeah.
adaptive controller, but you know, I love that there's an option here. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, because I mean, we have so many gamers out there, and so many people have their preferences between Xbox and PlayStation, to have at least the two options so they
Yeah,
can. I feel like those are the two big gaming consoles besides the Nintendo Switch, which is the new and exciting gaming
yeah,
solution. And
yeah,
they have come out with their own
yeah.
controller as well,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. The Nintendo came out with this is the HORI Flex, and actually this came out even before the Access controller. This was the second iteration, and what's interesting is the Xbox Adaptive Controller. They marketed it pretty well. It was going to be a thing, and the Access controller they marketed it pretty well. But the HORI Flex, I don't know that there was even like a any kind of marketing whatsoever. It was just, here is this thing that can help people. And it came out relatively, I wouldn't say relatively soon after the adaptive control, the Xbox controller, but it wasn't very long after there. But you can see there's some big differences here. There's a lot of buttons on the front.
Yeah.
And so it almost has the feel of that old Nintendo NES Advantage that I showed you earlier,
Hmm.
where you can lay it flat and then have these big buttons. However, there is no joysticks on here. There's
Yeah.
an up, down, left, right D-pad option, and then a bunch of other buttons, but it doesn't have that a joystick or anything. But what it does have is similar to the Xbox Adaptive Controller. It has a lot of inputs where you can put in buttons and switches and other things with the 3.5 millimeter jack. And then, of course, on the sides, like the other one, you can put in your joysticks as well. So you can plug them into the USB ports on the side. So pretty good. And actually, one of the cool things about this particular piece of hardware is that Nintendo built it so that you can do eye gaze as a part of it. So you can use
That's an
eye
awesome
tracking
feature.
and
Yeah.
whatnot. So I haven't tried it myself, but I was actually doing a presentation at a game accessibility conference, and Nintendo approached me and they asked me why I didn't talk about the eye gaze being a part of it. I was like, what? So I didn't even know about it. So it's
Oh
cool to
gosh.
know that that is an option for the HORI Flex, is what they call this.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
That's
it's
awesome.
a cool controller.
And I feel like the Switch is like one of the main big gaming modalities these days. Like everyone is
Yeah.
crazy over the
Yep.
Switch. So to have that option too for Nintendo
Yeah.
is great too.
Yeah.
So those are like the big three that are out
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah.
there's some third party people
Yeah.
out there too that are coming out with some exciting stuff. Do you have
Yeah.
any insight
Yeah.
on that?
I do. And actually, if I'm being honest, like when we started doing some of the accessibility stuff back in 2010, 11, 12, there are some other companies that were doing some, they had some big arcade style type controllers that a lot of people with accessibility deficits used, and really, I think they almost like began, started the conversation of having like dedicated ones for these bigger companies.
Yeah.
But before I go into the other ones, I do want to show this is one of my favorite things, and this is actually this is the newest thing that's come out, and it's the Xbox Adaptive Joystick.
Oh yeah.
And again, Xbox, and this is a part of Caitlin's. This is one of Caitlin's babies, but we were like, they wanted a one-handed controller to be able to play games like racing games or sports games or whatever. And so this is really cool. Like, it can connect to the adaptive controller, or it can connect straight up to your Xbox, and you can play. And it's got a joystick on it. It's got 4 programmable buttons on the face of it, and then on the front of it, it's got a trigger and a bumper. And I love this one. This is actually really cool. It's great for one-handed gamers, and a great extra kind of supplement to the adaptive controller. But there's been a lot of interesting things that have come out. I know a lot of people have made different controllers, and I do want to show this one. This is actually a company that sent me this controller that wanted me to try out and give them some feedback on it, but it's the Nhuad. And the Nhuad is a one-handed controller also, and they recognize that, a lot of the one-handed controllers don't have enough buttons on them or whatever. So what they did was they created this joystick, which is really a beautiful design. It's ergonomically feels very pleasant. You can set it down on your tabletop and be able to play. And some of the cool features is it's got 2 joysticks here. So most controllers have 2 joysticks. So it's nice because you can have both of them there. It's also got a lot of inputs here. You can program the buttons to do what you need them to do. And it's just got a lot of different options on here. It's not perfect, but it's a really great option for a lot of gamers. I've seen a lot of my single-handed gamers try it out and talk about the potential for it. So, that's really cool. And one of the things that I say in accessibility all the time is that we need to be better for people creating other things in accessibility, because anybody that's creating is helping the community win, and I want that so hard. So whether it's making a podcast or making a website or making a controller, more options are better for people. And so I love that these guys from Nhuad, made this, because this is great. There's also another one that has recently come out called the Byowave Proteus, and it's actually modular, and so you can actually take pieces and put them in different spaces and use it that way. And we'll pop up the pictures of it here so you can see it as well. But there are just so many options, and I think that the more that we do this, the better off we're going to be with different gamers. And I will say, no gamer is alike, right? So somebody might love the Nhuad and they don't like using the adaptive controller. Some people will like, oh, I love the adaptive controller because I can do this or that, and I don't really like this one. So the nice thing is, like, the more options, the better off we're going to be, like, in the end. So there's so many different possibilities out there.
And I'm so glad that we're able to share this information and show some of those options, because, like you said, like, every thing that we can do to increase accessibility for gamers, or accessibility in general, is a huge step in supporting all of the different features and everything like that. One thing that I want to touch on too is how you're talking about the controller that's modular. 3D printing is like a huge thing too with gaming, and how that can increase participation and accessibility. Can you talk about how 3D printing has kind of changed the game a little bit?
Yeah, I actually love that 3D printing is a conversation. Matter of fact, and I keep going back to Xbox, but they are doing a lot of this stuff.
Right.
But Xbox, when they released the adaptive joystick, alongside of the adaptive joystick, they also released the ability to download different types of ways to interact with the joystick itself by putting different pieces on top of the joystick. So if you have, if you need a bigger built-up joystick, you can 3D print your own tops, like this one, for example. If you don't see me, I'm holding a little top that would pop onto the top of a traditional joystick. And you can just pop it right there on top of the joystick, and then you have yourself a different type of built-up handle, if you will. And you can adjust the size of this as well. So you can make it bigger or smaller if you need a wider base, and you can adjust them yourselves. And actually, these also can pop on to the traditional Xbox joysticks as well. And so now I have, a built-up one. So and this is a free download from Microsoft.
Wow.
So, if you have a 3D printer or access to one, you can just, make one. And I think these took me probably a solid hour to make, so like they 3D printed right out. And so 3D printing, I think, is going to really be bigger and bigger of a deal,
Yeah.
especially if you want to customize something for somebody. That would be, a great option.
Yeah, I think the customization aspect of it is great for, any type of solution that we can provide for
Yeah,
gamers. And it's just awesome to see how things are just continuing to evolve and evolve to make things more accessible, and
yeah,
how we're seeing gaming as a meaningful occupation now, just not a leisurely activity. Like, people gaming is a crucial component for some people's lives, and we have
yeah,
to look at it
absolutely.
from this OT perspective as well, that like we want to make sure people can participate in the things that they want to participate in. So how we can use an adaptive controller, print 3D print things to add to the controller, and continue to advocate for new efforts to continue to make things more accessible for them. But
Yeah,
it's been awesome just chatting about
yeah,
how things have evolved, and coming from just having a stand so you can put your joystick down,
yeah.
and now you have this
All
interface.
these options.
Yes, I mean it's amazing, and I just don't think a lot of people know about them. I mean, it's awesome
Yeah,
that Microsoft used an ad for the Super Bowl,
yeah,
but like you
yeah.
said, I didn't even know about the HORI
Flex.
Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just not well
It
known.
was just there. It was just all of
Right.
a sudden like
Yeah.
something to order. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just continuing to advocate for that, and continuing to support the evolution of accessibility, I think is what we can really do and help push and support developers in this process that's going to be ever changing with technology.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cool. I'm excited. I can't wait to see the next iterations. Like, for the record, I don't know if anything's being working on, but I can't imagine it's not. So like,
Yeah.
I hope that at one point we see the adaptive controller version 2 and the access controller version 2, and
Mhm.
what do those look like? It would be so cool to fast forward 10 years and see like, oh, what have they made? So what features are out there? So it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be a part of it.
For sure. We're going to continue to see advocacy, some innovation, some collaboration, and this continued growing recognition of gaming as a meaningful occupation. And I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve as well. But I
Yeah,
appreciate you, Erik, like
yeah,
telling us all about the history and showing us how to use the controllers, what's exciting out there, and kind of giving us a little insight maybe about what's to
yeah.
come in the future.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for having me on my podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to dive into some of the other things, the buttons, the switches, and whatnot. So we've got a lot more coming for you guys, and I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you, everybody, for coming and listening to the OT Unleashed Student Takeover podcast series. And like Erik said, we have a lot of exciting continuing our talk of adaptive gaming with buttons and switch and mounts in the next couple episodes. But just stay tuned for those.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.